Namaste everyone, thank you so much for coming back to my channel. Today I am going to cover the third chapter as written by the greatest grandmaster Yasser Seirawan in his book Winning Chess Endings. We are going to learn about rook endings today. Rook endings are common. In fact, among clubs, tournaments and correspondence players, rook endings account for nearly half of all the endings. For this reason, it's quite important that all the players, beginners, intermediate as well as the advanced players, take rook endings quite seriously. For the same reason, this is going to be the longest and the most important chapter in this book. Because periodically taking stock helps solidifying understanding. Midway through the chapter, we will recap the rook ending principles that we have covered up to that point. So, hold on to your seats, get your cup of coffee, take your bathroom break if you want to take right now, because this is going to be a really long video. The chapter is divided into 8 types of rook endings, featuring several key positions that are worth memorizing. In addition to showing you some great examples of rook endings, I will challenge you to play one side and answer a series of questions. Take these challenges seriously as I did. And here I means the Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan. Good luck, and let's dive into the wealth of rook endings that Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan has for us. For the sake of simplicity, I am going to split this entire chapter into 3 different videos. The first video we are going to cover the 2 types of endings. One is going to be rook versus pawn, and the second is going to be rook versus pawn and rook. The second video is going to be slightly longer. It is going to be about rook and pawn versus rook and pawn, rook and 2 pawns versus rook and pawn, rook and 3 pawns versus rook and 2 pawns, and finally a situation where we have an outside passed pawn. And the third video is going to be about 2 challenges that Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan has posed for us, where he takes one side of the board and we have to take the other one, using all the principles that we learned from the first and the second videos that we are going to see. Okay, then let us dive into the first topic that we are going to cover in this video, which is rook versus pawn endings. Well, we all know that a rook moves in straight, humble lines up and down, side to side, and in spite of these limitations, it has associated with it a wealth of beautiful endings. In general, the player with the rook, in this case it's black, is trying to win, and as you will see, this is not always the case. White has a pawn, black has a rook, so that's why it's rook versus pawn ending, by the way. This diagram that we see, the setup that we see, is Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan's personal favorite. And guess what? It's black to move. I'm just kidding, because white is under check, so obviously it's going to be white to move. The move here is going to be king to b5. The move is self-evident. Why? Because if king goes to a7, or if king plays something like king b7, then black will simply play rook d7, and this will result in an absolute win. What does that mean? Can the pawn promote itself on c8 anymore? It cannot, because of the pin that we have over here. Which is why white plays king b5, rook goes to d5 with a check, king goes to b4. This is the only way to play for a win, because king b6 is going to be rook d6, and this will be a draw because of perpetual check. They'll just keep dancing between these squares and it's going to be check. So after rook d5, king b4, rook d4, king b3, rook d3, and king c2. At last, black seems to have run out of luck. White has prevented the skewer on the c file and is now ready to promote for a win. Had this king been somewhere on, I don't know, say c4 for example, then black would have just given a check from c1, therefore skewering the pawn. This king would just go somewhere here or here, and black would have taken the pawn, therefore leaving white with just a king. This is the reason why white marched all the way down to the c2 square. And now black is trying to set up a trap. By doing what? Rook d4. Do you see the trap yet? If white promotes next, what is it that black will do? Hit a thumbs up in the comments in case if you got the answer. The black would simply play rook to c4, and it's going to be black that's going to win this pawn. So what does white do in this case? It underpromotes itself to a rook. White sidesteps the stalemate trick and threatens checkmate on the a file. Because, let's see, if white had a queen, black would simply check, white would be forced to capture, and where will black go? Nowhere. Despite having a queen, black is going to be stalemated. It's going to be a draw. So that's the reason why, if now black gives a check, white can simply capture, and black still has one square to go to, so it's not going to be checkmate. It's not going to be stalemate, but it's going to be checkmate in the next move. So after after white promotes on the c8 square, black will play something like rook f4 to prevent the checkmate threat, and this will be followed by king b3. Suddenly, the threat of checkmate comes from a different direction. The hit against the a4 rook creates a double threat because of the echo checkmate on the c1 square, which wins the game. Is this not charming? Sit back for a moment and consider the list of tactics featured in this ending. Absolute pin, skewer, perpetual check, stalemate, under promotion, double threat, and echo checkmate. We can understand why this is Yasser Seirawan's favorite setup when it comes to a rook versus pawn ending. Now let's take a look at the other example. Yasser Seirawan calls this one an extraordinary setup. And now he's going to discuss something that's quite ordinary, but still extremely useful in understanding a lot of principles that we must understand. Okay. Now, this is a side. This is a setup where the white pieces, that means the side which has a rook, is trying to win. This position is quite common. I'm sure you must have encountered at least something similar on your board at least once in your chess journey. We can easily imagine that a rook ending has taken place in which white has promoted his h pawn, forced black to capture, losing his rook. Now it is black's turn to try to advance his b pawn to win back the rook and draw the game. In approaching this position, these are the four principles that one must follow. Principle number 1, king must escort the pawn to the promotion square. Right? So king has to escort this pawn as it marches towards the promotion. The pawn should not advance far from the reach of the escorting king. Suppose the king remains over here and the pawn keeps marching. What happens? The rook simply swoons into the first rank and will capture the pawn, while the king remains on the 5th rank, unable to protect the pawn. And finally, the rook should be behind the passed pawn. Well, isn't that going to be easier for the rook to capture it? With these principles in mind, we can understand that if black were to make the illegal move, say b2, for example, and then rook b8, the advanced pawn would be lost. So if the pawn were here, the rook would simply slide over here and capture the pawn. Right away we realize that the king and the pawn must be linked with one another. Next we understand that h8 is wrong square for the rook, right? Because it is neither checking the king, it is not blocking it off, not cutting it off, and it's not even attacking the pawn. Clearly, the best square is b8 behind the b pawn, which is the square. We have already discerned a lot, but how should we go about calculating this position? In the position that we see on the setup, what do you think the result is going to be? Is it going to be a draw, or is one of the sides going to win the game? To calculate correctly, don't think yourself that I go here, black goes here, white goes here, black goes here. No, that's going to take up too much of your time, and it's not going to teach you one of the most important ways of calculating these endgames, which is the method of counting TEMPI. Take another glance at this particular setup. To stop the pawn from queening, white will have to raise back with his king to cover the promotion square, which is b1. There are only two squares to run to. One is a2 and the next is c2, which both cover the promotion square. We can discount the a2 square as white's king is on the g file, right? So it's much better if white comes to the c2 square. It's going to be a shorter journey for the white king. In short, we know that white's king has to get to the c2 square as quickly as possible. We can count, right? King f6, king e5, king d4, king d3, and king c2. That's 5 moves. So we have to add another tempo for rook to b8. So that's 6 moves, right? And in these 6 moves, if white is able to achieve both of these feats, coming on the c2 square as well as the b8 square, then white wins the game. But we also have to count black's tempi. His king must cover the b1 square, just as the white king is trying to defend it. and his pawn has to get there too. So he counts b4, king c4, b3, king c3, b2, king c2, check, and we see that it also takes 6 moves. So is it not a draw? Actually, it's not. Why? Because it depends on whose move it is going to be. If it is white's move, then white wins. But if it's black's move, then black draws. We have to train ourselves to count tempi before doing concrete calculations. Only after you have counted tempi and determined the state of the position by normal play can you try to find a way to win a tempo. If you can win a tempo through tricky tactical play, you can turn the draw into a victory. Now let's see both the scenarios and make the actual moves, considering that it's white's turn to move. White will start with king f6 and b4, king e5, and king c4. The black king will try to prevent white king from coming closer to the c2 square. King e4 and b3, rook c8. Now this was a tempo breaking move. Now instead of black being able to move the pawn or black being able to defend the pawn from the c3 square, white forced black to leave the c file and go to the b file, following which black would do king b4, and now as you can see the white king has also come closer to the c2 square. It's just 1 square away and black king cannot stop white king from reaching that square. This is going to be followed by b2 and king c2, king a3 and rook b8. Is this not what we wanted? We wanted our white king to be on c2 and white rook on the b8 squares. In the next move, white will simply capture the pawn and checkmate the king after a few moves later. Let's go back to the original setup of the board. In this case, let's say it is black to move. How is black going to draw? We'll obviously start with b4, king f6, king c4, king e5, b3, and king e4. Or he could also try something like rook c8, king b3, aiming for the c2 square. So white king will not be able to reach the c2 square at all. After which, so let's assume that after b3, white plays king e4, b2, rook goes to b8, king c3, king e3, and king c2. So there's going to be only one piece that's attacking the pawn and one piece that's going to be defending the pawn, which means rook takes pawn, king takes rook, and 2 solitary kings remain on the board, which is going to be a draw. Are you comfortable with this method of counting tempi yet? If not, let's not worry. We have another example of counting tempi. In this setup, white has the benefit of a good location for his rook. While the ideal spot would be the f8 square, that is going to be behind the passer pawn, controlling the promotion square to start counting tempi is quite a plus. Well, you can see white is actually covering the pawn's promotion square. White needs 6 moves to get to either the e2 or g2 square with his king. Black needs 5 moves to set up his draw position. With white to move, the sequence is clear, but black's king obstructs his path to the e2 square. He will head to the g2 square. White starts with king e7, king f6, f3, king g5, f2, king g4, king e3, king g3, king e2, and king g2. As you can see, there's just one poor king that's going to defend the promotion square for black, while there are 2 white pieces attacking it. Eventually, it's going to be a rook versus king ending, and rook is definitely going to win. And counting tempi gets close to the truth for most basic rook ending positions, but it is not the whole truth. Often, the superior side can win a crucial tempo and make a victory from a position that could be drawn according to the tempi count. This is usually done with a rook check. We also saw this in the last example. We saw that how rook gave a check from c8, breaking the flow of black's moves and gaining the tempi against the opponent pieces. In this setup that we see right now on the screen, this position was actually analyzed by the 5th world champion, Max Euwe. Strictly going by the tempi count, the game is a draw. Right? If white can position his rook behind the g pawn, which is going to be here. That's the g8 square. With a gain of tempo, he will win, right? But if white does not gain tempo, then black will simply keep marching, while white will have to waste one move to go to d8 and then f8, or g6 and g8. Sorry, g8. It's not f8, g8. However, white is going to be smarter than that. White is going to make sure that it gains tempo while going to the g8 square. Let's see how white does that. Starts with rook f6. Also, while you're at it, try to determine why king g6 is a mistake with which white could no longer win. Once you find the answer, write them down on the comments section. White starts with rook f6, king goes to e3, and rook g6. Right? So now, what happens if pawn simply pushes? Well, rook will just take, right? So to avoid that, now king will have to come back one step, which is going to be detrimental for it. So king goes to f4 to protect the over pawn on g5, and now white takes advantage of this particular loss in TEMPI to go to the g8 square. Not yet. White has favorably repositioned his rook to its ideal post. It doesn't actually have to go to g8 because it's behind the passed pawn, and that's all white needs. Having earned that advantage, white's next concern is how to bring the king to the play. The king, if you remember from the last examples that we saw, the king has to be either on the f2 or the h2 squares to defend the g1 square, where the black pawn could promote itself. The discerning reader might have noticed that in the previous setups, kings come close to one another while jostling for the control of vital squares. In some positions, it is necessary to take a creative route. This tactic should spark a recollection of the crooked path. Do you remember we studied crooked path in the king and pawn endings video? If not, then the link is going to be in the description. Please have a look at what crooked path is and how a crooked path can actually help king maneuver itself to a very important square. And that's what we are going to see now. King g7. Strictly speaking, as we discussed earlier, rook g8 will also achieve the same position by rook g8, g4, king g6, g3, and king h5, because you'll eventually see that as black king marches to the f2 square, as pawn tries to reach the g1 square, white king will already be on h2, while we already have a rook behind that passer. However, another approach that white can take here is king g7, g4, king h6, g3, king h5, and king f3. What happens if pawn just goes to g2? Any guesses? Yes. Sorry. The rook will simply take the pawn, and it's game over for black. To avoid that, black would just play king f3, king h4, g2, king h3, and, well, you know what the fate is going to be like for black now. All of this could happen only because black played an important move of checking the black king, making it go away, and asking the black king to come back a step. Rather than going closer to the f2 square, it actually had to come back to f4 to protect the pawn. And this is where white gained a tempo, which was crucial for it to win the game. Yasser Seirawan tells us that missing this tempo-winning rook device is common, even in master games. In this position that we now see on the screen, white is on the move, and white played king to d6, which was actually a mistake, because after f5, rook e2, king d4, black stopped white's king from coming back to block the passer. So white cannot move here, so white is still going to be behind, and therefore it's going to be one square away from being able to reach the g2 square. So it's one tempo behind the black pieces, and therefore might not be able to win the game. So let's see what white actually missed. Rather than playing king d6, the first correct move that white should have played was rook to e2. White gains a crucial tempo by doing this. Now black has two choices, but both of them lose. He can either play king to d5 and rook f2. King has to come to e5 because otherwise rook will simply capture the pawn. King d7, f5, king e7, f4, and rook f1. White steps out of the way of king e5, king e4, and king e4, king e3. So white simply steps out of the way before that even happens. So after f4, rook f1 is the move white plays. After which, black will play king e4, king f6, f3, king g5, king e3, king g4, f2, and king g3. What is white going to do? Is white going to play, I don't know, king e2, then simply rook takes on f2, which is going to be a rook versus king ending, which white will surely win. And another possibility was white starting with rook e2, as we already saw, and we saw what's going to happen if black goes to d5. But what if black goes to f3? In that case, rook goes to e1, threatening to skewer the king and the pawn from f1 square. If this was not possible, then white would have simply gone somewhere behind to take charge of the passer from the back, while the white king marches toward the passer pawn and prevent the promotion. After which, prevent itself from a skewer, black simply pushes the pawn, and now if rook f1, then king can go back to protect the pawn. But black doesn't realize that the white king can come closer to the pawn as well. And it actually does. Now king goes to f2, rook goes to a1, f3, king f4, and again white will win. Black is merely given the choice of which way white's king will cover the promotion square. It could either go here or here, depending on where the black king travels. So this was about the counting tempi method. Let us look at another method that Yasser Seirawan describes, which is called as cutting the king. Friend, black is on the move, and after doing the tempi count, realizes that the position is drawn. Black plays king c5, king h7, b4, king g6, king c4, king f5, b3, king e4, b2, and rook b7, which black will play king c3, and it's an easy draw. Why? Because it's only the rook that's attacking the pawn, and the king cannot reach the c2 thanks to the black king that is firmly set up on the c3 square. However, white has a slightly better try if black plays something like king c5 and directly goes to rook c7, king d4, rook b7, king c4, and king g7, b4, king f6, b3, king e5, king c3. But once again, this position is still not enough for white to be able to win. It is just a better attempt. However, this, as agreed, this is a draw position if black plays correctly. But let's assume that black's vigilance slips and he thinks that he can just do as well by pushing the pawn instead of pushing the king. Say black plays something like b4, which is a gross blunder. I know we are not grandmasters here, so we may not be able to see that yet, but just hold your breath. This is a losing move. Black is severely punished for not having the escorting king positioned with the passer, as the principles previously discussed dictate. White is now able to cut the black's king from the support of the pawn. Right? Based on this arrow, can you guess where the rook is going to jump to? Rook g5. Now, black simply cannot bring its king forward. So there's just one good move that black can do, which is to push the pawn, which is eventually going to be eaten up by the rook, and the black king is going to be so far away that it won't be able to help its own pawn. In this particular situation, because white was able to cut off the black king, it really does not matter where white king is, and the counting tempi method does not really help. It's because it's not important at all. Black cannot advance the pawn because after b3, rook will simply jump to g3, b2, rook b3, and no matter what black does, white will simply gobble the pawn. Even if black promotes, white will simply take that queen. Study by Grandmaster Pal Benko, America's most eminent problemist and endgame theoretician. It is white to play. If I were to ask you what would your first move be, then what do you think it's going to be? Take your time. If you think that you want to counter tempi, if you want to just analyze the position and see how white can steal a victory from this position, then take your time and figure out what the best move could be for white to start with. Yasser Seirawan says, or rather the Grandmaster Pal Benko says, it should be rook b7. It's a nasty check. Why? Because now black has to decide which pawn he should try to promote. Is it going to be this one, or is it going to be the c file, the one on c file? And white will play accordingly. If black instead started with rook taking on c6, it's going to be a move that's going to cost white a tempo. And why is that? Because then black will simply play a5, and black has no problem with drawing. If you're thinking about capturing the pawn, you're not familiar with Benko's problems. He delights in showing this most natural choice to be a mistake. So let's see why rook b7 is the move that white should play. Black goes to c3, king comes to c7, a5, rook a7. White gains the tempo by pulling back the black king. Why? Because if black pushes, then rook will simply take. So to avoid that, black king has to come back to b4. So black king does that. And black can't put his faith in his c pawn anymore, because if black had played c5, king would have come to c6, c4, king c5, king b3, and king d4, c3, king d3. And as you'll see very soon that with just one move, the white pieces can attack this pawn, this defenseless pawn, and it's gonna be down one pawn for sure. To avoid this complication, instead of pawn c5, black plays king to b4, followed by king d6. There's a stalemate motif in this position, so white lets the c pawn live. With the foolhardy king takes on c6, a4, king d5, a3, king d4, king b3, king d3, and king b2, followed by king d2, a2, rook b7, king a1. Black is saved by stalemate, because if the rook remains on this file, black has nowhere else to go, and it's going to be a stalemate. So to avoid all of that, white does not capture on c6 and instead moves on d6, followed by a4, king e5, a3, okay, king e5, a3, king d4, king b3, king d3, king b2, king d2, a2, and rook b7. Once again, black will obviously try to just hide on the a1 square, threatening stalemate, except the best part here is black still has a pawn on the c file which white has not captured. Therefore, black will still have a legal move to make, and it is not going to be a stalemate, right? So after coming to b7, king goes to a3 and king c2. With that, while the white king comes closer to the promotion square while also having the rook on the move to check the king and also attack the pawn, it's going to be much easier for white to defend this position and also rather win. Now this is going to be followed by, say, something like under promotion. It's going to be promoting to a knight. Why? Because black wants to gain the tempo by checking the white pieces. Had white promoted to a queen, guess what this is? It's a skewer. So to avoid that, black has to gain tempo at every cost, and it under promotes itself to a knight, followed by king c3, king a2, rook b2, king a3, rook b6, king a2, rook takes on c6, king b1, rook h6, king a2, and rook b6. Now white is forced to move the knight. Why? Because if king goes to, say, a3, then this is checkmate. So that's the reason why black will be forced to move the knight, after which king will take, and after a few moves white is going to be able to checkmate black king. With that, the discussion on rook versus pawn endings comes to a close. So next on board is going to be rook versus rook and a pawn. In this particular topic of rook and pawn versus rook, we are going to look at several concepts which are going to be absolutely crucial for you to win these games. Or you can say endgames. The first one that we are going to start with is called LUCENA. Let's see how can we master the LUCENA technique. There are three principles that are in play when it comes to rook and pawn versus rook endings. The first one is the passed pawn must be supported by the king. Right? The second is the defending king must be kept as far away from the passer as possible. In this case, white is about to promote, and we need to try to keep the black king as away as possible from the promotion square and the promoting pawn. This is done by cutting off the enemy king with the rook, either on the rank or a file. In this case, we are actually cutting off the black king from the and preventing it to enter into the f file. So it's going to be completely cut off and will remain on the g or the h files. And finally, both the attacker and defender, the rook is best when placed behind the passer. We have seen this before. So the black has to be here and white has to be here. That's how it actually works as far as the rook protection is concerned for its promoting pawn. Taking these principles to heart will serve us well. The position that we see right now is arguably the best known position in chess. This position's winning method was published by LUCENA 500 years ago and is still valid today. In this position, white will, what we call, is going to build a bridge, an effective strategy for all pawn positions except the notorious A and H pawns. Now, what does Yasser Seirawan mean by building a bridge? Consider the characteristics of the position. Black's king is cut off from the f file, right? Unable to cover the promotion square. So black actually cannot come to any of these squares and try to prevent white from promoting. To win the game, white's king will have to move aside and promote the pawn, right? Obviously, it will have to go on any of these squares so that white can reach the d8 square and promote itself. But what's going to happen as soon as white king moves? You guessed it right. The black king, the black rook is right there to give it a check and make it quite difficult for white to eventually promote the white pawn. Let's see. If white plays king e7, rook e2, king d6, rook d2, king c6, rook c2, and king b6, rook d2. So black is going to try to capture the pawn. So white king will have to come back, and will come to king c7, rook c2, king d8, and the game will go on. We are exactly at the position where we started from after so many moves. And no matter what black plays or white plays, it's going to be quite difficult for white to come out of this particular nightmarish situation. So instead, what white would do is first build a bridge by playing rook f4. Now, why did white play rook f4, such a random move coming on the fourth rank on the f file? Why? What is white trying to accomplish? Let's find out. Black will play rook c1. Why? Because if black plays something like rook e2, then simply rook c4, and it will cover the c file. Right? Here black would play rook c1. Why? Because if black plays rook e2, then simply rook c4 is going to cover the c file, and the white king will be able to hide behind the rook and eventually aim for promoting the pawn. To avoid all of this, black plays rook c1, followed by king e7, rook e1 check, king d6, rook d1 check, king e6. Now, white drops the immediate threat to promote, but is ready to play rook to f5 and eventually rook d5. Black could play rook e1 in this case. For example, say if black plays rook e1, then king will move slide to d5, rook d1, and rook d4. This completes the bridge and it wins the game for white, because black cannot immediately check the king or even threat the pawn, and black king is also far away from the white pawn. So after king e6, black would play king g6. Now white cannot play rook f5, because if it does, then rook takes, and that's what black actually wants. Black wants to draw the game. That's the reason why black played king g6, which is going to be followed by rook g4. What's the objective now? It is actually pushing the black king further away from the d pawn with a move like king h5 and rook g8, covering the d8 square, this one. Black will soon run out of checks. Let's see how. Black will play rook e1, king d6, rook d1, king c6, rook c1, king b5, rook b1, king a4, and white zigzags his king back up the board, eventually d7, d8, and queen. This is gonna be, and black is definitely gonna lose the rook, because now say if black comes to d1, white will simply promote, and black will be forced to capture on d8. White will take back, and white will be upper rook. So you might have realized mastering this Lucena position means the difference between drawing and winning the game. If you make the effort to learn its mechanics, it is going to be well worth it. Another example is what we see on the screen right now. The diagram is quite similar to what we just saw, and the procedure is identical as well. Yasser Seirawan has tried to help the defense by getting the black king one file closer. As you can see, it was the previous position, it was 2 files away, but now it's just 1 file away from the promoting square, and it's black's turn to move. Obviously, black cannot give up the h file. It's a beautiful h file. It is actually preventing white king from going anywhere at all. So in case if black plays something like rook e2, then simply rook h1, and we take control of the important h file. So instead, black will play king e7, rook goes to e1 with a check. White's king needs room to be able to escape the g8 hatch. Right? Black's king is pushed farther away from the passer. Now black will have to play something like king d7, and black would lose even more quickly if it plays king f6. It's quite intuitive, right, for us to play king f6, but this will be followed by king f8. And if black plays king d6, then it's king f7, rook f1, king e8, rook g2, rook e7, rook g1, and rook f7, because white would play king e8 f8, and there will be 2 defenders of the g8 square, therefore enabling a perfect, seamless, protected promotion of the g pawn. So to avoid all of that, black would play king to b7. This will be followed by rook e4. White prepares to build his bridge. Once more, I hope you remember what building a bridge means. Let's see with this example. Let's cement that concept with this example. Once more, black's rook cannot give up the h file, so black rook is quite stuck over here. So black would play rook h1, king f7, and the obvious threat is promotion of the g pawn. To prevent that, black would play something like rook f1, king g6, rook g1, and king f6, rook f1, king g5, and if black plays rook g1, simply we have rook g4, and that's called building a bridge using the Lucena position. The bridge is complete. White has stopped the series of checks and now has the joy of promoting the pawn. I hope you understood the Lucena position quite well, because now we are going to enter into another principle of mastering the PHILIDOR position. Position that we have on the screen right now, that illustrates the second best known rook ending position. This classic device is a must for our bag of tricks. In this device, the defender is given the ideal situation. His king sits on the passed pawn's promotion square. Well, it's a nightmare for white, right? So, to make a draw, it is crucial that the blockading king is not forced away. Black has only one way to keep this position, as we can see in the diagram. It was François-André Danican Philidor in the 18th century, reputedly the best chess player of his time, who showed the world how to correctly defend these types of endings. The best move for white in this case is, for black in this case, is rook a6, because this way it prevents the white king from advancing and planning to wait until white advances his pawn. This can be followed by rook g7, rook b6, you can see the sweet waiting game, followed by rook a7. White realizes that the intended rook g6 and rook takes on g6, king takes on g6, and king e7 is actually a draw. Therefore, white plays rook a7, followed by rook c6, rook b7, rook a6, and then eventually white loses patience and plays pawn to e6. The threat is to advance the king with king f6 and to win the game. To avoid that, black plays rook a1. Why does black play rook a1 right now? The idea is simple. Black wants to be behind the white king such that it can give a continuous series of checks to the white king. When white king has nowhere to hide, like it cannot hide behind the pawn anymore because it's 2 squares away, And also, the white rook cannot come here on time on the 4th rank to build a bridge with the white king. So this is why black plays a very timely rook a1, and this e6 square is no longer available for the white king to hide behind. So it's going to be followed by king f6 and rook f1, king e5, rook e1, and so on. You can play out this position against a friend or a bot, and you'll realize that the draw is quite easy now. The Philidor method, therefore, is a method of defense that works against all pawns, meaning that the superior side cannot tolerate a blockading king. White will move here and keep moving wherever it wants to go. Black can give a continuous series of checks, and despite being a pawn up, white will have to concede a draw. Now let's start from the top on this position once again, and we will assume that black is unfamiliar with the Philidor's rook a6 principle or Philidor's defense. Instead, black makes the mistake of playing rook f1. Now king goes to e6. What is black going to do now? White sets up a mating threat with his king and forces the blockading king to evacuate. If black plays something with a rook, then rook h8 is checkmate. So black is forced to move the king. And black does this by going to f8. And this is the only move. After king to d8, for example, if king had gone to d8, then in that case, rook h8, king c7, that is going to be a win for white, and as you will discover shortly. At this point, a discourse on the short side versus long side of the passer will be useful. When the blockading king is forced away from the promotion square, as it was in this case, let's get back to the position where we saw this one. Okay, so now it's black to move, and black has the choice of going to the d8 or the f8 square. This side is called the long side, while this side is the short side. When the blockading king is forced away from the promotion square, in this case e8, it is best if the blockading king moves to the short side of the passer, which is the blue side of the passer. In such a situation, the e pawn almost bisects the board, but not quite. The short side is the king side. In the case of a passed d pawn, the short side would be the queen side. Why should the defending side move his king to the short side? The answer lies with the defensive rook. When the blockading king is forced to flee the promotion square, the defending rook has to give checks from the side on the ranks of the board instead of from behind on the files. So now this is an important point for you to remember. If the defender is unable to check from the side, the attacker will set up the Lucena position and win. Remember Lucena, we just studied about it minutes ago. It's nothing but building a bridge. The defender needs to check from the long side of the board where the rook will be more effective. Right? Now let's put this principle into practice. Say black goes to king f8, rook h8. White's first order of business is to get the black king as far away from the passer square as possible. King has only one place to go, that is g7. This will be followed by rook e8. White is trying to protect his passer so that when the king moves, the passer can advance under the protecting influence of the rook. We have now moved forward into the position that's going to be so exciting to learn about. White will play rook a1. This is the right defensive idea in such situations. Black is aiming for a series of checks on the ranks so that he can bring his king back to the promotion square. Right, so black is targeting checking the white king from the ranks. This is going to be followed by rook d8, trying to build a bridge over here so that when black tries to give a check, the white rook can interfere and build a bridge, which is also a type of Lucena position. So rook plays d8, followed by rook to e1 once again, because now the rook is not defending the pawn. So the moment king moves, it's going to be easier for black to capture the pawn, also after the king coming into play. Rook will play d7 check, king f8, rook d8 check, king g7. White's check have been ineffectual, and if he gives up control of the 8th rank, the black's king will scurry back to the e8 square. White will play something like rook a8, but it doesn't matter because white will not be able to make any progress. For example, if white had played something like rook d5, then king f8. So in one move, we are going to see that the black king returns to the e8 square where it is supposed to be. To avoid that, white plays rook a8, followed by rook e2, rook a1, king f8, rook b1, what would happen if black played king e8 in this case? Rook b8, checkmate, right? So to avoid that, after rook b1, black plays a waiting move, rook e3, king d6, rook d3, king e6, and rook e3. White has made no progress at all, but he is wise to test the defensive ability of his opponent. So he makes one last effort. It's going to be rook b8, king g7, rook b5, king f8, king d6, rook d3, rook d5, rook takes, and king e7. This is a draw, and we have seen this already in chapter 2. White cannot win this game if black plays correctly, and it's very likely that black knows what to do next. Look, black's life had been quite easy so far. Yasser Seirawan makes things much more difficult for black. Therefore, in this particular position that we see, Yasser Seirawan has advanced the pawn by one square. It was earlier on e5, but now it's on e6. And it is only 2 moves away from promotion. A nice plus for white. On the shorthand, we have also allowed black to retain his advantage. His king is on the short side of the board, right? As we had seen, the blue side of the board is the short side of the board, whereas this one is the long side. So black also has an advantage, while white also has an advantage. But black has an option here. If he knows this principle, the defender can draw if the defender king is only 1 file away from the pawn, which is the case here, and if the defending rook is 3 files away from the pawn, which is also the case here. In our example, black's rook is on the a file and the passer in the e file. With b, c, and d files, between the rook and the passer, the rook is 3 files away. So let's continue. Black will start with rook a7 check, rook d7. Black's checks from the long side force this into position. The 3 file principle is needed because after king going to d6, rook can play a6, king d7, rook a7, king c6, rook a6, king d5, rook a5. We can see that white has not made any progress. If the defensive rook were only 2 files away, black would lose a tempo with his rook. For instance, in this particular position, if we allow that the black rook is on the b file instead, if it not a, but if it were on the b file, it would have been a completely different scenario and would not have the advantage that black has while having a rook on the a file, because then the black rook would come to b7, king will go to d6, will check from b6, and king will go to d7, b7, and then king will come to c6, attacking the rook on b7, right? So it's definitely not going to be easy, because now black will have to move its rook away from the b7 square and therefore lose tempo. So remember, the defender's rook has to be 3 files away from the passer, which is the case over here. And let's see how that works out for black. It starts with rook a7, rook d7, and now instead of taking the pawn, taking the rook, if it takes the rook, then it's obviously game over for black. Black continues with rook a8, followed by rook d8, rook a7 check, rook d7, and rook a8, rook d6. White's last move was a crafty one that puts enormous pressure on black to find an exact defense. At this point, if you can set this position up on your board or on the analysis board on your phone, then try to figure out black's best move. If you can find the answer, you should be able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of these 3 possible moves. One is rook b8, the other is rook a7 check, and the third is king to g6. Now let us analyze each of these moves. If black plays rook b8, it's a mistake. It's an immediate thumbs down. It brings the rook within 2 files of e pawn, that's file 1, file 2, and therefore it loses. White would simply play rook d8, rook b7, king d6, rook b6, king d7, rook b7, and king c6. Now black will have to waste 1 tempo to bring its rook to safety, while white will safely be able to promote the pawn using the rook and the king that are also close to the pawn. Now, instead of rook b8, if black plays rook to a7. And in that case, king goes to e8, when the advance of the e pawn becomes unstoppable. The usual king f6, like for example, it's a king f6, then we simply play e7, and that comes with a check. So black really cannot take the e7 pawn, although technically it can, but it will not be able to legally, since it's a discovered check on the black king. Now, instead of king f6, if black responds with rook a8 check, then rook d8, rook a1, and e7. Once again, black had to waste a tempo to go behind on the first rank to try to attack the passer pawn from the e1 square, but this position is enough for white to start building a bridge and form the LUCENA position. Finally, after rook d6, the only move that's remaining for analysis is king goes to g6. In this case, black will have to wait for white to try and make progress. If black plays king g6, rook will play something like white will play something like rook d7, and this returns to the previous positions. Black has an easy task after king d7 and king f6. For example, if king had played d7, then king f6, e7, and king f7, because the threat of winning the e pawn, which draws with this. Going back to king g6, at this stage, if white plays rook d8, then rook a7 check, king goes to e8, king f6, or even something like king f8 and king f6. In both the cases, e pawn is going to be lost very soon, because there are no defenders after e7. Rook can simply take on e7 while the rook is protected by the king on f6. So, considering all of these possibilities, white plays after king to g6, white plays rook d7, king plays g7. Black repeats the position, holding on the opportunity to run back to the e8 square. So the black king cannot really run far away. This will be followed by rook c7. It is sensible for white to do his best to try to trick black into making a mistake. The crucial thing for the defender is not to give up the a file. And black plays rook a1. Now what? Well, a bad move would be rook b8 and rook a7, therefore giving white a winning advantage, because now once again black is just 2 files away from the e pawn, whereas white has the control of the a file. So to prevent that, black plays rook a1, king comes to d6, and king f6. Once again, this is the only saving move. If the king retreats to king f8, then simply rook c8 check, and king g7, and e7 wins on the spot. Therefore, after playing king f6, white will play king f7 check. This necessary move prevents black from checking on the d file and driving the white king away. King goes to g6, rook f8. White is all set for the e pawn to go home. Once more, we will see the benefits of check on the long side. Rook a6, king d5, rook a5, king d4, rook a4, king c5, rook a5, king c4, rook a4, king b5, and rook e4. So despite white's best efforts, he is unable to squeeze his passer home, because now the rook can simply take, and there's not going to be enough support for the poor white pawn, despite being so close to home. Does that mean that if black's rook is only 2 files away from the passer, the position is 1? The answer is usually yes, but there are exceptions. It depends on where the attacking rook is. To understand this better, let us look at this position that we have in front of us. And in this position, white has been given one more advantage, that is the control of the a file. If it were white's play, he would start with something like rook g1. Simply rook g1 check, driving the black king away on the h file. And this will be winning for white, because that will also help white to set up the LUCENA position, building a bridge on the e file, which will prevent black from being able to check the white king. However, in this case, it's black to move, and black is just in time to secure a draw. It starts with rook b7, king d6, rook b6. Now, in this case, black must absolutely avoid king f8. Why? Because this can be followed by rook goes to a8, and if instead black played king f6, then we have rook f1, king g7, and e7. White rook is cutting off the king, while the passer is very close to home. Therefore, after king d6, black plays rook b6 check, king goes to d7, rook b7 check, and king goes to d8, rook b8 check. Black keeps up this harassment until white's king gives up the d file, and king goes to c7. It's rook b2 and king rook f1. Once again, white stops the black's king from covering the promotion square, so it just cannot move to the f7 square. However, black has a fantastic move, rook a2. It just switches to the a file, and it is just in time to make a draw. Let's see how. e7, rook a7, and king d6, because king has to come closer to the pawn to protect it. Rook a6, king d5, rook a5, king c6, rook a6, king c5, and rook e6. Okay. So usually when the defender's rook is not 3 files away, the game is lost. But again, this position that we just saw, the black rook is actually just 2 files away from the pawn that is on the e file, but still it managed to secure a draw. Moving on to the next position, we have connived to bring white to victory by steadily increasing his advantages. Black has no checks on the side. Right? Black really has no checks on the side because black cannot come on b7 right now because the rook is over there, and the king is not definitely not going to go to the final rank without good reason. So black must be able to find a very stern defense. Let's see how it's going to start. Rook b8, that's the best move. If black moves something like king to g6, then rook a8, rook b7 check, king d6, rook b6, king d7, rook b7, king c6, and rook e7, king d6. This is the position that we've seen, and this does not really bode quite well for black. So to avoid all of that, black plays rook b8. This will be followed by king d6. This is the only way white can salvage the situation, and here is the logic. What happens if white instead plays rook a1 trying to check the black king from the g1 square? In that case, we have a check, and it's going to be a draw because this is the exact position that we saw in the previous setup as well. And even if white played something like rook d7 and rook a8, this is also going to be a draw. And finally, king d7 and king f8 is also going to be a draw. And none of these results is what black is hoping for. So instead, after rook b8, king goes to d6. Now black has 3 defensive possibilities. One is king f8, the other is king g6, and finally we have king f6. Let us visit each of these variations and see how the resulting situation will be if black makes each of these moves. Let us start with king f8. In that case, king d7 and rook e8, which will be followed by rook a1, preparing to check on the f file, therefore throwing the king away to the g file and allowing white king to capture the rook. To prevent that, black would play rook e7 check, king d6, and rook b7, rook a8 check, and king g7. After that, e7 is the winning move because black king is a little too slow. It will not be able to reach the pawn on time, and if black rook captures, then king captures. It's going to be rook versus king ending, which is going to be winning for white. So that's how we know that king f8 is definitely not the right move. So this was not the right move. Let's take the move king g6. This can be followed by rook a1. This is a startling retreat. White's rationale is to be able to check the black king or to support the passer from behind. So it's either the e1 square or the g1 square. This will be followed by rook b6 check, because if black plays rook b2, then e7, rook d2, king e6, rook e2, king d7, rook d2, and king e8. White gains the Lucena position, and after king f6, sorry, not at this move, and instead of rook b2, if black played something like king f6, then e7, rook b6 check, king d7, rook b7 check, king d8, rook b8 check, king c7, and rook e8, king d6. The winning rook a1 f1 move will crush black completely. Therefore, after rook b6, it is best for the king to simply slide to king d7, rook b7, king c6, rook b8, king c7, and rook b2, followed by rook e1. Finally, white has the tempo, and it might just snatch victory from the jaws of death. This can be countered by rook c2, king d8, and rook d2 check once again, king e8, and now there are no other checks. Black cannot really give any check, and also the king cannot come close to the pawn to prevent its march. And finally, the e7 move will be the winning move because the Lucena position is now achieved. Alright, so we saw that king f8 does not work. We also saw that, because after this move, we saw that king f8 does not work. We saw that king g6 also does not work. Now let us analyze king f6. King d7. In this case, white has to be extremely precise. He dodges the rook f7, king g6, rook f1, rook a8, e7, and king g7. This is going to be a draw position. Oh, sorry, king g7. This is going to be a draw position, as we have already seen in one of the previous structures. Therefore, after king d7, so king d7 is the best move. Black can follow by playing king to g7. This is going to be followed by king e7. As counterintuitive as it seems, king e7 is the best move because black is being completely squeezed. Black is helpless, but will have to play something like rook b1 because it cannot really check from b7. Rook will simply take, and it does not have a better square to go to. This can be followed by rook a8 and rook b7 check, king d6, rook b6 check, king d7, rook b7 check, and king c6, and rook goes to e7, king d6, rook b7, and e7. There is no way black can stop the promotion of this particular pawn. Rook cannot go on the 8th rank because we have a white rook is already waiting over there to gobble it up, and even if the king came close, for example, the pawn can simply march to e8 because the rook is going to protect the e8 square. These variations were extremely complex, requiring concentration throughout. It is precisely this type of study and reams of analysis that cause such angst among chess students, myself included, and that's what the Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan is saying, which means, well, if he can get anxious and frustrated by these positions, then obviously we have all the right to feel the same. But he assures that we should not fear and we should not suffer, and just think of how wonderful it will be to steal a victory from a drawn position or turn a lost game into a draw. Apply yourself and you will be glad that you did. At this point, let us take stock of all the different things that we have learned so far. It might be a very good time to take a break. So, to sum it up, the principles that we have learned so far are: first, in the Lucena position, building a bridge wins. In the Philidor position, keeping the rook on the 6th rank or the 3rd rank draws. When the blockading king is forced away, the king should go to the short side and move rook 3 files away from the passer. When playing against a lone pawn, count the TEMPI. Keep in mind the crooked path and how to win a tempo with a rook check. The next topic that Yasser Seirawan wants us to understand is when we have a pawn, but it's on either the b file or the g file. Unlike when fighting against a central pawn, a defender has less to worry about when fighting against a b or a g pawn. For example, in this position that we see, the defender is perfectly placed and has nothing to worry about. right? The black is on the promotion square, the black king is on the promotion square, and the rook is also on the final rank, so it seems to be quite a favorable situation for black. And if it were black to move, he would draw quite easily, simply by playing rook h6, king c5, rook g6, and following the advice of Philidor. Black waits for white to advance his pawn, so that after b6, rook g1. What happens? The rook is ahead of the king, and black will keep checking the king from the back, and the checks will continue until it's a threefold repetition and a draw game. But for the sake of understanding the fight when the pawn is on the b or the g file, we'll assume that it's white to move. The right move for white here is king a6, followed by rook h6, and now b6. Therefore, white is safely hidden behind the pawn. This will be followed by rook h8 once again. Black goes on to the final file, because if it does not, for example, if black played anything else, then there would be a threat of checkmate over here. So black has to play rook going to h8. This will be followed by rook b7, king goes to a8. Now, the only wrong way over here, the only way to go wrong here is king c8. Do you remember just we had studied in the last position that whenever the king is forced, the blockading king is forced to move from that promotion square, it should go on the short side. And that's what it does. If it goes to c8, for example, then king a7, rook h1, rook b8, king d7, and rook g8, rook a1, king b8, which allows white to flush out the blockading king, right? And then with b6 and b7, LUCENA position will be achieved. So instead, black plays the right move, which is king going to a8. This will be followed by rook a7, king b8, and white can't make further progress, because after b7, rook h6 is going to cost white the rook and the game, because the king will be forced to go, and black will simply take the rook, and the next move will also get the pawn. Now, what you can do is just use this position and shift the pawn and king to the g file, and see if you are able to come up to the same position or to the same results if white were to move, and also if black were to move. Meanwhile, for the sake of content of this video, we are going to move to the next position, where the pawn is going to be either on the f pawn or the f file or the c file. The pawn being one file closer to the center makes a world of difference. The defense could hold if black had to move. For example, in this case, so black would simply play rook a6, king e5, and rook c6, waiting for the pawn to advance with f6. And the moment it did that, black would simply go back and start giving checks from e, f, and g files, and the king would have nowhere to hide, and it's going to be check after threefold repetition. But to understand this position better, we will give white the chance to move first, and white will play king g6, followed by king g8, f6, and rook c8. Black has nothing better than this waiting move, and white actually wins the game. In case if black plays something like rook f8, can you figure out a way of white winning? If you can, then please share that answer in the comment section below. I'm extremely eager to learn about it from you. The best move for here, black here, is rook c8, followed by rook g7 check, king h8, rook h7 check, king g8, f7 check, king f8, and rook h8 check. And you can see what's going to happen next. The king will have to go to e7, followed by king coming to g7, and the promotion is confirmed. The next topic that we are going to learn about is cutting off the king on a file. We already saw how it is when the rook cuts off the king on the rank. For example, if the rook were somewhere on the 6th rank right now, the white rook, I'm saying, if the rook were on a6 right now, then the black king would not be able to cross that invisible line, and that would be cutting the king off on the rank. But now we are talking about cutting the king off on a file. If black's rook and the king could switch places, right? If both of these could switch places, then black would be on the promotion square, black's king would be on the promotion square, which is ideal, and the black rook would also be in a very optimum square to be able to draw using the Philidor's defense. As it is, black's king is cut off from the c file, right? By the white's rook, or d file. Right? so it really cannot go to the c file right now because of the white rook. So black plays something like rook d8. Rook takes and king takes, obviously. This will be followed by a pretty simple king and pawn versus king ending. We have already seen this in the first chapter of this particular book. If if you missed learning the king and pawn versus king endings, then I will request you to go back to one of my earlier videos where I have talked about the concepts of opposition and distant opposition. After king d4, king goes to c8. Now we know that this is a scenario where black will be able to draw, because if white comes to c5 next, then simply black will take opposition. If white plays some other waiting move, then black can do the same until black gets the chance to play opposition against the white king. So if white plays king d5, then black will play king d7, c5, c7, b5, b7, and there will be no progress that white will be able to make. So to avoid all of this, so assume that in this case it's going to be white to move. White is to move, then the defender's life is definitely not going to get easier. And if white's pawn were on c7 square, for example, and if the white king were on the c6 square, then winning would have been a snap. But we are making it difficult for both the pieces to find out what would be the best series of moves to be able to convert this game into a win for white. White has to start with king d4. The threat is to advance a c pawn. If the king remains on c3, and then c5 is obviously a blunder because the rook can simply take. This will be followed by rook b8 to give a check, a forcing move. King a5, rook c8, king b5, rook b8, king a6, rook c8. Now black is trying to hold up the advance of the passer, right? So instead of rook c8, if black had played something like rook b2, then c5 is a winning move, which will be followed by rook a2 check, king b7, rook b2 check, king c7, and white will set up the LUCENA. So to avoid all of this, black plays rook to c8, which will be followed by rook to d4. White keeps black's king cut off from the d file, ready to reposition his king and advance the passer. A grievous error in this case would be to keep up the d file and play rook c1. Allow black to move to e6. It's going to be able to be closer to the pawn, with the rook also attacking the same. Therefore, white plays rook d4, followed by king e6, king b7, and rook to c5. This is a better choice because if black played something like king e5, then rook d5 actually wins the black rook, right? Because if black goes over here, then simply the black rook is wasted for no reason. So to avoid that, black will play rook c5, followed by king b6, rook c8, and c5. White wins because black is unable to prevent him from setting up the LUCENA position. So I hope you're getting a hang of how the rook and pawn versus rook endings work based on the different setups that we are seeing on the board. There's one more setup that I'm going to bring up right now, but in this case, we are going to see that the black king is cut off on the short side of the passer. The drawing method in this case is quite easy. White starts with king d4, rook h8. Black immediately grabs the file that is farthest away from the passer. This will be followed by c5, and here comes a series of checks. King d5, rook h5, king c6, rook h6, and king b5, followed by king b7. Now the PHILIDOR position is in place. Eventually, the black's king will be able to find refuge on the c file. The black rook will be able to go on the 8th rank and keep checking the white king from the 8th rank. And no matter where the white king goes, black will find a way to keep checking without allowing the passer to move towards its promotion square. Now the next position that we are going to see on the board is also similar to what we just saw in the previous setup, except for one thing. Black's king is cut off from the c pawn by two files. Like we see there's file D and file E, and it's cut off 2 files away from the promoting c pawn. This extra file means that black's king will have to spend an extra tempo getting back to the c file, and that makes all the difference. The winning method for white in this case is straightforward. King b4, rook b8, king a5, rook c8, king b5, rook b8, king a6, king c8. This move forces white's rook to guard the c pawn, as we saw in the discussion of one of the previous setups. And correct move would be correct move here would be rook c1. Earlier we had played rook d4 because the king was just one file away, but now we can play rook c1. That being said, rook e4 is also a winning move. In that case, king will play f5 and rook h4. But it's going to be a bit more difficult for white to maneuver through this setup. So instead, white plays rook c1, king goes to e7, king b7, then rook c5, king b6, trying to hunt the rook down, and rook goes to h5. He abandons the c file because the defense rook c8, c5, rook b8, king c7, and rook b2, rook e1, check, king f7, and c6 is easily broken. So instead, rook goes to h5, which also is followed by c5, king goes to d8, trying to go close to the promotion square. But we have rook a1 that's going to push the king away from the promotion square. This will be followed by rook h2, rook a8, king d7, and c6 check, king d6, rook d8, king e7, and c7. The pawn, king, and rook, they are playing in perfect synchronization, supporting each other and keeping the black king away from the promotion square, while the black rook is also basking so many files away from the promotion file. And the passer scores a victory for white. With that, we will move on to the next topic, which is called cutting off the king on the rank. We just saw how to cut off a king on a file, but now we are going to see how and when to cut off a king on a rank, such that the king is not able to move forward and the lone pawn will be completely defenseless as it moves towards the promotion square. When the defending king is cut off by a rank, as you can see here, in this case, white rook is cutting off the black king off the 4th rank. The superior side should consider itself fortunate. In such cases, it is a game of king and pawn versus rook, right? Because it's a king and pawn versus a rook. White's first order of business is to get out of check and preparing to escort the pawn. So white starts with king d6, will be followed by king d8. It's quite an intuitive move. King e6, king e8, and king d7. What happens now? Can black check from e7? Can black check from d8? The answer is no. So the black rook is going to have to move, which is going to give white the tempo to move the pawn ahead. So rook g8, black is helpless, and d6. Once again, black starts the game of giving as many checks as it can, but it's soon going to run out of checks. King c7, rook g7, and we have d7 once again. As you can see, the black king desperately wants to join the party, join the attack, but it just can't because the powerful white rook is blocking it off from the 4th rank. The pawn marches triumphantly down the board. This tactic of cutting off the defender's king by utilizing the rank is powerful and has snared many a victim. Let's look at one more position. Over here, it's black to move. It's a famous position which was played in 1970 FIDE into interzonal. And black has an easy draw with a direct rook g8, king f5, rook f8, king g6, king g8, king f7, and rook g4, followed by king f6, king d4, rook a3, king e4, rook b3, and rook g8, because further progress is just not available, right? Nobody can really make any progress with no matter how many checks white gives, no matter checks how black gives to the white king. It's still gonna end up to be a very drawy situation, as both of them are pulling the kings to reasonable squares and keep making sure that the rooks are far away from the opponent kings. So black stumbles ahead with king d4. It's not a loss, but it's unfortunately a step in the wrong direction. Let's see how. This will be followed by rook a3, which will be followed by king e4. It's also a mistake once again, and white gets an opportunity of moving the pawn ahead. Followed by rook g8, a very good move. The king will have to come back to defend the pawn. Rook h8, king g5, king g8, king h4, and king e5. This also is a complete blunder. Just because of this move, now white is going to win. Black should first drive the white king away from its active square. Right? That should have been black's motive. The draw is assured had black played something like rook h8, king g3, king e5, rook a6, and rook h1. Can you see what black just did right now? Black came back on the first rank in order to set up a Philidor defense. It will continuously keep giving check from the f1, g1, and h1 squares, and white will really have nowhere else to hide. After king e5, after this move, white simply moves king a6, cutting off the black king from the 6th rank, and it's going to be completely powerless going forward. Even if king plays something like king f4, it's not going to work, and even rook h8 is not going to work, because after rook h8, king g5, rook g8, king h5. Remember, the king has to be close to the pawn, or else the rook will simply capture. Rook h8, and we have rook h6, the Lucena position. I hope you remember what building a bridge is like, and this is exactly what this is. This will be followed by rook a8, g5, rook a1. Well, black is going to try to do a Philidor defense by so in case if the pawn moves ahead, then black is going to check from h1, and let's just play it out. Then this is going to be a draw position, right? It's just gonna keep playing this moves. It's not gonna really work out well. So instead, so that's the purpose of rook a1. After which, ideally, the white pieces should play rook b6, but this is definitely not going to work, right? So let's go back to the king f4 position. This is what black plays, because we saw that rook h8 does not work. White will simply play rook f6. So now the black king is going to be one file farther away from the pawn and the king. It will play king e5, and then we have g5. Once again, we have this beautiful setup where all the pieces are protected by each other, and it really is not in the favor of black. Taimanov plays a few moves over here. Okay, so this game is played between Larsen and Taimanov. Taimanov is with black pieces, and he resigns soon after these moves. King g4, rook goes to h1, once again trying to do the Philidor defense, followed by rook a6, rook g1, king h5. Remember, we still have the g6 square, the hiding square available for the white king, so Philidor defense cannot be completed by black. Rook h1 and king g6. That's exactly what white wanted. Now we have rook g1, king h6, rook h1, king g7, and the pawn will inexorably keep advancing forward. This device of cutting along the rank is more commonly seen in A pawns and H pawns. So with that, we are going to move on to the next topic, which is about a rook versus a pawn on A or H files. Let's see the position that we have on the board right now. This is a special type of ending which is generally easier for the defender to hold, because as in the case of the B and G pawns that we saw earlier, the superior side has no wiggle room. This position that we see on the board, it demonstrates just how difficult it is to win the superior ending. At first, it appears that white should have no problems at all. This is a Lucena position, right? White can simply jump forward, build a bridge, and just make sure that the white pawn promotes. But no, it is not. because white has no file other than the b file to step into. Because white's king is stalemated, the only chance of rescue is to bring the white rook to the b file to release the king, right? Uh, for the pawn to go to a8, the king has to step away, and both of these squares are actually unavailable for the white king because of the rook that we have on the b file. However, note that black's king is cut off 4 files away from the passer. Right? It's 1, 2, 3, sorry, 1, 2, 3, and 4 files away from the passer, and this is going to be crucial for white, which is going to help white with the ending. It's going to start with rook c2, king e7, rook c8, and king d6. Right? This will be followed by rook b8, rook h1. So white was trying to force an exchange with the rooks, because had the rook taken right now, the pawn would have taken on b8 and would have promoted to a queen. So to avoid that, black rook is forced to move from the b file, therefore giving some wiggle room to the white king, and therefore allowing the pawn to promote on the a8 square. This is followed by king b7 and rook b1 and king c8. There is no other escape route for white. Just if you can figure out what is wrong with the move king a6 in this position, then consider yourself as a champion, and I'll determine that once you share the answer in the comments section. But what white plays here is king c8, followed by rook c1, king d8, and now black has no other checks, so black will have to go all the way over here to give a check from h8, which is actually going to be checkmate, and that's exactly what black tries to do. This is going to be followed by a check from our side instead, followed by king c5, and now this position is where you need to decide how white should play. Take your time and think about it before you watch this video. And if you can find the answer to this one, bravo. I'm looking forward to reading it in the comments section. Let's look at some possibilities. Let's look at something options that white has at this stage. One is promoting to a queen, right? If this if white plays that, rook h8 is actually a skewer. White will move and black will simply take the queen. It is going to be rook king versus rook king, and that's going to be a draw. So obviously, to avoid that, white will try to play something like rook e6, right? So that if black plays rook h8, we have the rook blocking it, and the queen will be safe on a8. And after this, black would play rook a1 and rook e7, trying to protect the pawn, followed by king b6. This once again is going to be a draw position, because the pawn will go, and so will the black and white rooks. It's going to be king versus king, which all of you should know by now. That is not it's not possible to win if you are in such a position. So we saw that rook e6 also does not work. Now let's talk about rook going to a6. Let's see if this works. This will be followed by rook a8. Rook h8. Then we have king e7, rook h7, king f8, rook h8, king g7, and rook a8, followed by king f6, king b5, rook a1, and king b6. Black has two attackers on the pawn. One is the rook and one is the king, whereas white only has one defender. So this once again is going to be a draw, because black will get the pawn in exchange for will get a pawn and a rook in exchange for a rook. So it's going to be king versus king once again. So we saw that none of these moves actually work. So what is the right answer? The right answer here is rook to c6 check. This is the only way to move. Why? Because the rook is immune from capture, as the pawn promotes with check and skewers the black rook. Have you seen it yet? If black takes, then it's a queen, it's a check, king moves, and we get the rook, right? So black actually cannot and should not, it's anyway going to lose, but it still should not capture the rook. So black instead plays king b5, followed by rook c8, rook h8, king c7, rook h7, and king b8. So this rook provided a beautiful shelter for the king, and is going to be completely immune from all the checks, and the king can rest comfortably while the pawn goes ahead and promotes itself. Black does not have enough time to move to h1, then a1, and attack this pawn, because by the time it's already going to be a queen. This exciting example shows the difficulty of promoting the a pawn. As we have seen, the defender's king has to be cut off far away from the passer, but sometimes even that advantage is not enough. The next topic that we are going to cover today is about VANCURA. We are going to master VANCURA, and for that we need to look at the position that we have on the screen right now. This was a study composed by a little-known Czech composer Josef VANCURA from I think somewhere in the early 20th century, and this was published 3 years after his death, so it was published posthumously. And as we can see in this position, the black king is out of action and must rely on the rook to save the day. White is very close to promotion. It's the a pawn, so we already saw how difficult it is to promote an a pawn, but let's see how white does it, or not. White starts with king b5. White could not have made a better move. Why? Because if white played something like a7, then we have rook a6, king b5, rook a1, king b6, rook b1, king c7, rook c1 check, king d7, and rook a1 again. Right? There would be no hope for winning at all. So to avoid all that, king goes to b5, followed by check on f5. Also a good move and necessary. White was threatening to win the win with rook c8. This was going to be the winning move for white. The king must not be allowed to protect the pawn and release the a8 rook. Right, so it would have come to it would have come to c8 and c7, given a check, while the pawn marches forward to a8 and promotes itself to the queen. So instead, black plays check, followed by king c6, rook f6, king d5. Clearly, white king cannot advance because of the endless series of checks on the f8, f7, and f6 squares at the king gone in this direction. So to run away from that, white plays king d5, followed by rook f5. We have king e6, and then we have rook f6, and then we have king e5. Now, white king does not have any more checks. It cannot go here, it will simply capture. It cannot go here, king will simply capture. And that's the reason why white played such a zigzag move with its king, coming closer to the rook. So after king e5, black would play rook b6. And after playing rook b6, black can once again start giving checks, but white king can simply come zigzag back to where the rook is and force black to lose a tempo. After rook b6, we have king d5, then we have rook f6 once again, and then we have rook a7 check, king g6, and we have rook a8, followed by king g7. White cannot make progress, and you can play this position out with any of your friends or maybe even the bot, and notice that the white king cannot advance because of repetitive checks. Black can go here and keep giving checks from the b file, and if the king is on the on the left side of the board, then black can simply keep giving checks from all of these squares on the f file. And the pawn cannot advance because the defending rook quickly gets behind the pawn. The moment white plays something like a7, the rook can simply jump on a6, and when the white rook moves, black will simply capture. So the rook is trapped. So look at this position once again. This is how we started, and understand exactly why the result is a draw. Let's take one more example. This example, it actually takes time to appreciate this particular position, which he believed that the position was a win for white, but later conceded his oversight. He based his original assessment on the following considerations. White intends to bring his king to the a7 square, release the captive a8 rook, and win the game by promoting the pawn. These were white's ideas. Black's king is unable to play because of the skewer threat. Okay? Let's see what he means by that. So Tarrasch envisioned this active defense, which starts with king f2, king f7, king f3, 6, right? And a7. White is threatening to play rook to h8 or rook to e8, giving a check and making black lose a tempo, and then promote the pawn while also defending the pawn from using the rook. If play continues with, say, king d7, then simply rook h8. The king is too far away from the promoting pawn, and once the pawn promotes, black will have to capture. White will capture. It's going to be a solitary rook against the king, which is going to be winning for white. He also envisioned a passive defense with white making a lengthy march with his king to the a7 square. Follow along these moves to understand the idea. King f2, king h7, king e2, king g7, king d3, rook a4, trying to cut off the king, king c3, king f7, king b3, rook a1, king b4, rook b1, king c5, rook c1, king b6, rook b1, and king a7. So king has come to the pawn's rescue. The rook is now free to move. That was the whole idea. King e7 and rook b8. If rook captures, king captures, and the pawn will promote. Obviously, black does not want that, so rook goes to c1, king b7, and because now the king has a breathing room on the b file, followed by rook b1, we have king a8 and rook a1 once again. But now the pawn can move ahead, followed by king d7, king b7, rook b1 check, king a6, rook a1, king b6, rook b1, king c5, and this is going to be winning. However, the Vancura's drawing method, published about 16 years later, changed Tarash's assessment. Returning to this study, let's go back on the top once again. Returning to this study, to the Vancura's principle, Vancura's drawing method, black should rather have played something like this. After king f2, black should have started with rook to a5. Then we have king e3. Then we have rook e5 check, king d4, rook e6, king d5, and rook f6. Right? And this is the Vancura's position, and it is going to be a draw. This is exactly what we saw in the in one of the previous setups as well, when we started learning about Vancura's method. I think it was this particular setup. It's very similar to what we have on the board right now, except for the king is on the different square, but that does not matter. Black will keep checking from this file or this file, and the moment white rook moves away, the black rook will start attacking the pawn from behind. So it is going to be impossible for white to make any progress, which is why this is actually a draw. Now let us look at one more position. This was composed by Ponziani in 18th century. It has thrilled and excited chess lovers for 2 centuries. From whatever that we have learned so far, the position that seems first seems like an innocent draw. After all, the defending king is so close, right? It can just simply. It seems like it can simply be at a kissing distance from the white pawn. The rook can also join the attack and then just capture the pawn, and the game would end in a draw. But how can white possibly win? Give this position some careful thought before watching on. This position has 3 salient features. Let us list them down first. The white's king is not cut off from the b file. What does that mean? White can simply start marching away and allowing the white pawn to promote on the a8 square. In the earlier position, we had seen that the rook was on the b file, preventing that possibility. If the c2 rook shifts to the b file, this one, the result is an immediate draw. Why? Because it's going to be cutting off the white king from escaping, and therefore the white pawn will not be able to promote on the a8. And finally, black's king is cut off on the rank, but if it were on the c8 square, then the result would be an immediate draw. Once again, because the white king would not have been able to move out, so the pawn would not promote. However, that's not going to be possible anymore because the white rook is cutting off the black king from crossing that boundary. The solution will go something like this: king b8, rook b2, king c8, rook a2, and rook g6 check. The first step that white needs to do is push black all the way down the ranks. King will have to go to c5 because black has no other choice. Equally mundane is going to be king b5, king b7. So as you can see, the black king will never be able to approach the white pawn anymore. And even if black played king d5, for example, then in that case king b7 also works, rook b2, and rook b6. This is all going to lose. and that too without any tact. So to avoid that, the best move that black can play right now is king c5 followed by king b7. Once again, it's going to be the same because we have a king protecting the pawn. After king b7, rook b2, king c7, rook a2, and rook g5 check. And the study begins to unfold. It would be a shame at this point for white to play something like rook c6, king d5, king b7, and rook takes on a7. Why? Because if the king takes, and black will get what black really wanted. And to avoid that continuation, white plays rook g5, followed by king c4, king b7, rook b2 check, king c6, and rook a2 once again trying to attack the pawn. This will be followed by rook g4, pushing the king as far away as possible, king c3, king b6 coming back to protect the pawn, and rook b2 check once again. White's king must be checked to stop the threat of rook g8, right? If the rook goes on g8, then this pawn will have additional protection on the a8 square, which is what black is trying to prevent. But it's not going to work out so well for black anyway. King c5, rook a2, rook g3 check, king c2, and rook g2 check, king goes to b3, and rook takes, king takes, and promotion is imminent. Is this not a sweet victory? Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan has another example for us. This was also composed sometime in the early 20th century, and it was founded by Alexei Troitsky. I hope I'm saying the name right, and he is regarded as the founder of modern art of study composition. In this situation, we can see the black appears to have an easy draw. Easy draw because white's king will have no cover if it tries to run to the queen side. It turns out that white can rely on black's king for shelter. Well, how does that work? Let's see. King plays f4. White introduces the threat of check and queen the pawn. It's going to be check and queen. And the moment it queens, even if black takes on a8, we have a rook that can take the rook back, and then it's going to be a rook versus king ending. King f2. Black hides behind white's king, right? So now white rook cannot actually check the black king. But which side is actually doing which side a favor? Let's see. King e4, king e2. Black has to remain in lockstep. It's a win for white. If instead at this place, black plays rook a4 and king d5, rook a5, king c6, rook a6, and king b7. Now black king is left alone, far away from the board, and the pawn is definitely going to promote because it's going to have a rook as well as a king protecting it, while the attacking side only has one rook. So to avoid that, black remains in perfect lockstep with the white king by playing king e2, king d4, king d2, king c5, king c3, and now comes the move rook c8. Right? Because if at this point black plays rook takes, then king b6 actually wins because it's a check, so the rook cannot do much. Even if it tries to meddle, the rook will simply take, and it's going to be rook versus king ending, which white can finish beautifully. Alright, so with that, we are going to bring the first video to a close. We are going to cover all the remaining concepts and rook endings in the next video. And the third video is going to be about two challenges that Yasser Seirawan thinks that we should be able to solve, considering all the knowledge that he has provided through the content that I'm going to share in the first and second video. Thank you so much for staying tuned for this chapter. I hope you're learning, and I hope you keep learning. And if you are enjoying this channel and this video, then please do like and subscribe. Every like and every comment and every subscribe is going to be an indication that my efforts are being compensated for. It's the Chess Puzzler signing out.